Hello everyone, my name is Hannah Miller-Bell. I'm a professional illustrator from Pennsylvania, and this is the process video for my piece titled No Trespassing. Let's begin. For those who are new here, hello. It's wonderful for you to join us. For those returning to the studio, I'm glad to see you back. Be sure to get cozy because I've got a good one for you. The concept for this piece was pretty simple. I wanted to draw somebody floating in midair because that sounded fun and interesting. But then that raised the question, well, why would a person be floating in midair? It was then that I decided to piece in some folklore that I knew, a leshy, the mysterious, powerful being taking form behind the young man in this piece, and have that be the reason the young man is floating. Essentially, for those who don't know, in Slavic folklore, a leshy is a being that guards forests and was known to abduct children and lead travelers astray. I'll include a link to the Wikipedia article about leshies down below, so you can read up on that later if you're more curious. So now that we know that, the more informed concept is a child got lost in the woods, and now the leshy is abducting him for having trespassed into his realm. Now we have our story, and we can get to work. I pieced together some visual references, a person floating underwater, some leaves, and all kinds of other inspiration for the leshy, of course, and set about making my sketch. Now, I must admit I was a little lazy and didn't do any comp sketches beforehand to see if there could be any other more interesting compositions that could accomplish the same goal. Nor did I do any value sketches or color scripts, like I probably should have done to have a more successful image. Thus, the image is very centrally focused and is rather predictable. Nothing too crazy here. I should also have probably gathered even more reference for things like the hoodie, the pants, and the shoes, but I was fairly confident in my visual memory and shorthand for those things, and wanted to get on with the process of making the piece. Don't be like me. Do your due diligence and don't assume you know what things look like. There's always some detail you may miss. Moving on, for compositional purposes, I decided it would be interesting to have leaves become an element that provides motion and interest, and also add some depth to this piece, with smaller leaves in the back and larger leaves in front, and flowing in a loose, circular, bean-like shape around the centralized figure in the midground. And then, the main antagonist, our dear leshy friend, was added just behind our main character, to add some context to this piece. As a side note, it was really fun to sketch out a deer skull. Brought back memories of being in the classroom drawing cow skulls. Good times. From there, I worked out what I thought the value structure should be, with the main character being the brightest element in the piece, and all other elements being in shadow, with the exception of the leshy's eye being a secondary source of light, enhancing the idea that the leshy is doing magic-y things to make the main character float. That decided, I went about pulling colors from my leaf reference from before to get my color palette, which is totally a hack you should use, and taking some notes from my painting classes in college, I started with the background to set the tone for everything else, creating a vignette-like effect around the characters in the middle to draw the eye there. At that point, I decided to solidify the characters and clean them up, going about inking. Even though it's all done with a pencil, I don't actually use an inking brush per se when working on the final lines for this piece. It was in the midst of doing these finalized lines for these characters and the leaves that I realized I had so many tangents around the leaves and the legs of the Leshy, creating a lot of weird visual relationships between them that I didn't enjoy and intend. So I moved things very minutely. It's but a blip in the time-lapse here. You probably won't even see it, but I fixed those relationships, even though there are a ton more that I don't see until after I'm finished with this piece. Ugh. Which is why having a second pair of sharp eyes is important for your work. Someone else could have caught what I didn't before I had it printed, but oh well, you live and you learn. And once that was all done, it came time to work on the coloring for this piece. You may notice that I start off with this nice orangey yellow, but then it changes to a wild, obscure green out of nowhere, before going to the correct colors. And I'll explain that here now, because I realize that is a little bizarre. Okay, story time. While I was in college learning about Photoshop and layers and all that stuff in order to create digital art, of course we learned about clipping masks and what they were. The way my teacher explained it made absolutely no sense to me, but I figured out a way for it to make sense in my brain. Clipping masks are essentially a way for you to impose something, say a color, on top of a source layer, say a shape, and not go outside of the boundary imposed by the source layer. So in my film and animation fueled brain, this led me to think about the concept of a green screen. As you may or may not know, a green screen is, well, that. But because it is the color green, it is easily transposed upon, and you can put whatever you want over what is green. With this concept in mind, I made the source layer, whatever the shape I want to stay within, green, as a wink and a nod to the green screen concept, and secondly, as a visual aid for me to see if I've missed anything, as this particular jarring, almost neon shade of green is hard to miss in the midst of my other colors, and most of my usual palettes, to be honest. It's very silly, but it works and helps with my workflow. Getting back to the production, I get the correct colors for our main character figured out, work on the lighting, deciding that the main source of light is going to be the Leshy's eye, and logically figuring out where shadows would fall opposite, what surfaces would catch light and how strongly, etc. Then I loosely color in the leaves, going back to clean up edges later, before figuring out how to color the leshy. Because he is our antagonist, I make him the darkest shape in our composition, and additionally, because of that, his eye being our strongest light source is in direct contrast, which pulls our eye there. Because he is the protector of the forest, I felt his mantle should be representative of that, and share all the colors of the leaves, and working out a gradient effect through trial and error. Moving in, we work on his skull and what color that should be, and it should be noted I did not use a white because while we think of bones being white traditionally, in all actuality they are not stark white, but are actually more of a yellow tone, especially as bones age. To fit in more with the color scheme of this piece, I made the yellow of the skull more desaturated and more towards a brown hue. From there, we add the light to the eyes, which, because of what we discussed earlier, with white being too stark and out of place in this piece, we went more yellow. The leaves are then shaded, again always keeping in mind that our main source of light is that of the leshy's eye, and working out logically where to go from there. It is at this point in the making process I have the thought that the vignette in the background is too plain and not visually interesting, and that I should add something back there, and decide a line of tree silhouettes is a good idea. I work on textures and a backing source of light, decide against it because I don't want competition with the leshy's eye as a light source, push the background even further back by making it darker, and add a subtle rim light around the leshy to separate him from the background, playing with the layer functions of the main character's lighting situation, adding a signature, and finishing it up to what it is today. On the final physical printed piece, I had to do some touch-ups like fixing with some dark brown paint some scratches that showed the white of the paper underneath, and so I also added some embellishments while I was at it, and added gold paint to the rim lighting around the leshy, and that of his eye to make it a little more special. Let's go ahead and show off our final piece. And now, let's review what I liked about this piece. It was fun to do, it captured a dark and moody vibe I was going for, and the compositional elements of the leaves and the leshy's eye are really well executed. What could be improved and what we can take away from this? Don't settle for the first composition that comes to mind. There's probably a more interesting composition you can choose if you do more sketches. Don't be afraid to gather more reference. Don't assume you know what things look like, and there's always more details that you may have missed. Always be looking out for tangents, and don't be afraid to get a second pair of eyes on it, so it can be the best that it can be. What part stuck out to you? Do you intend to incorporate anything I did into your own practice? Do you make the same mistakes I do? Comment down below. Thank you so much for coming along with me for an extensive behind-the-scenes look at No Trespassing. Be sure to keep on glowing and have a good one. I hope to see you again soon.